Now, when you look at black people, you look at the African American people, what you will see are a people that of all the people on the planet have been the easiest people in time and antiquity to enslave. Nobody, no other people, while there have been enslavement, there have been nation capturing nations. When America came here and took this nation from the American Indians, the Navajo, the Arapaho, the Cherokee, the Blackfoot, all of that, America could not enslave the Indians. They wouldn't do it. They would not be slaves. They would not serve the purpose of slave, not even indentured servants. They wouldn't do it. The American Indians would not. It's been tried in France. It's been tried in India with the class systems. It's been tried with peoples all over. Russia has tried it. Nobody has made as good a slave as black people, the ones on the dark continent of Africa. Of course, they don't call it that anymore. Nobody has been as good a slave as black people. Now, I'm not saying this because I dislike black people. I live in a black skin. I live under, well, I suppose culturally people will identify me as an African American, and I live in a black skin. The name that I have, James Manning, comes from the Irish that lived in South Carolina that gave liberty to my father and my mother. But I live in a black skin. I'm not saying the things about black people because I would want to hurt or harm them or not identify with them. I'm saying it because it's historically true. Search the records. When the Jews went into Egypt to be slaves, the living quarters were not the same as were down in the quarters of the slaves here in America. And there was no intermingling of Pharaoh and his army and his people with the Jewish people. The Jews remained pure-blooded Jews. There was no mixture. There was no miscegenation. And there was equity. They were more of servants, indentured, than they were slaves. And even the boy Moses was found by Pharaoh's daughter floating down the Nile River. She picked him up. Though he was the son of a slave, she picked him up and brought him to Pharaoh's court, and Pharaoh kept him and treated him like it was his own son. Nobody on the planet Earth has ever been as willing a slave as the so-called black man, the so-called African American man. Nobody has ever been. And the reason why the black man has served as a good slave, has made a good slave, is because of his mentality. Now, my job is to wake him up. My job is to bring the stark truth that has caused him to behave the way he behaves, live the way he lives, kill and cut and lie and cheat and be dependent and fail to recognize his rightful place before God, his opportunity and strength and responsibility. My job is to clean all that up, tear all that up, and make him a man, because he's not a man now. Jesse Jackson is not a man. Al Sharpton is not a man. Black leaders, T.D. Jakes is not a man. Barack Hussein Obama is not a man. They're slaves. They still have the slave mentality. Louis Farrakhan is not a man. They're slaves. They're still slaves. They have not yet, if they were men, then black people would not be living, doing, killing, living at the bottom of the world's social register, have died out. Where there was in 1965, there were 40 million blacks, Afro-Americans, or Negroes in America. Now there are only 30 million. 10 million have died. 2 million are in prison because black people have not become men and women yet. They're still slaves. And the very fact that they follow people like Barack Hussein Obama and you can't show them the truth. That's how they became slaves in the first place. The witch doctors in Africa sold them to the white man, and they refuse to acknowledge it to this very day. Black people still tell that kunti kinte lie that white people came and threw a net on them and caught them one by one in the jungle and put 5,000 of them on a ship at one time. It didn't happen that way. It's a lie, but black people fail to recognize it because a slave never looks at the truth. They sold the Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, the Barack Hussein Obamas sold black babies into slavery to white slave traders off the west coast of Africa. But to this very day, black people won't acknowledge it. To this very day, black people will not realize they've not built anything. All of their cities are ghettos, filled with crime, laden with darkness and filth when it doesn't have to be that way. Black people could be cleaner, safer, more loyal, more integral. They can be. They don't want to be. They don't want to be. They don't want to be. They enjoy being dependent. They enjoy the lies of the Democratic Party that keeps them dependent. They enjoy hearing somebody say, we'll build a house for you. You don't have to build your own. We'll build a school for you. You don't have to build your own. It's in their hearts. It's a curse.
A major departure of black psychology from Eurocentric psychology or white psychology is the fact that black psychology is openly and consciously political and recognizes that the very basis for what we might call mental problems or other kind of problems in the black community is the political structure, the Eurocentric structure that is present in America and present in the world. Eurocentric psychology, while offering us some information of value, is somewhat limited in the fact it generally starts from the standpoint of the so-called family and sees the family as the cause of mental illness, juvenile delinquency, educational problems, and so forth. It examines the mother-child relationship as the basis for the personality orientation of the patient. However, we must recognize as African people that this approach is inadequate, primarily because it appears to be relatively non-political. While mental problems, juvenile delinquency, and other problems may flow from family relations, we must recognize that relations existing within a family structure are themselves shaped by the political situation in which they are embedded. The relationship between the black mother and child, the black father and child, the politics that go within the black family structure, the politics of color, the politics of quality of hair, the politics of sexuality, and so forth that exist within the black family reflect to a very great extent the politics of the larger white dominated society in which black community finds itself. In an effort, if an effort is made to get at the roots of mental problems and other kinds of problems that exist within the African American individual and community, it must begin with an analysis of the political context in which they coexist. It must start with recognition of the fact that juvenile delinquency, criminality, mental problems, family problems, and other kinds of problems which are prevalent in our community are social necessities, are political necessities. We have stated before that in order for us as a people to be in the situation we are in and not be in concentration camps and not have pointed at our heads throughout the day, we must be maintained in a particular state of mind. And in a sense, then we literally must be out of our minds and we must be kept out of our minds. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Dr. Amos Wilson's The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy. So I opened this video up with the clip of the gentleman giving his thoughts, views, and analysis on the state of the black community, the mentality of the black community. I will admit there are some truths and some lies that he had within his talking points, but it goes into what we're talking about, what Dr. Amos Wilson is talking about in this chapter about the mentality of the slave, the mentality of oppressed people, the mindset of the oppressed people, but also the environment that the oppressed people live in, which reinforces the mindset that was given to them. And this is deep because environment matters. Whether we want to admit it or not, environment matters. The environment that an individual exists in will determine, well, not necessarily will determine, but will have factors in determining how or in determining the quality of life of said individuals that exist within that society. So two things within this in my mindset is, one, looking at the effects of the society that we live in, that's a society that's controlled and ran by white supremacists, but also what we would look like if we took control, at least of the immediate neighborhoods that we existed in, the immediate confines of our living quarters. If we took control of that and had more influence on ourselves internally, what would we look like? How much greater could we be? Because the gentleman did have a point in the clip, and it's something, well, a couple things that he talked about. One is us waiting on white people to do something for us, but also the black male and the black female not being able to be men and women, because that goes back to some of the theories that Dr. Francis Chris Wilson was telling us. The black male can't take his place as a black man because of the inadequacies, the mental and the physical inadequacies that have been imparted on us throughout the centuries, right? But we have, no matter what, we have to find a way to break those chains. We have to find a way to get the mental chains off of our brain. Said the thumbnail that's up there, right? The chains that own our brain, right? We have to find a way to break free. Going back to Dr. Atbar's book, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, we have to find a way to break those chains. We cannot just say, okay, well, you know, the old adage, if you can't beat them, join them. No. That's a loser's mentality. And we are not losers. We've been losing for too long. It's not fun. I don't know about y'all, but it ain't fun, right? So changing that mentality. If you can't beat them, figure it out. Figure it out. If you can't beat them, figure it out. And that's where we should be right now. But that's when it goes into us creating that community for ourselves, insulating ourselves within our own ideas, our own practices, our own customs, our own culture, right? Our own ways of living that will insulate us. Because like we talked about last week, if we should be sending out more spooks that sat by the door than any other time in history because of the access to the information. So Africanizing our minds, reprogramming ourselves with the African consciousness. So when we go out into the white world, we won't be so apt to assimilate because we know who we are and what our purpose is. We wouldn't sit in to become best friends with white folk. We were sent in to get what we need to bring it back to ourselves and empower ourselves. So picking up on page 66, and I read from page 65 to 80. I read from pages 65 to 80. So I'm picking back up on page 66, the second paragraph. Mental maladaptiveness among our people is a political, social necessity, and therefore is instigated by political, social forces, and the Black psychology must begin with this very fact. The political necessity is in part based on the demographic facts that the European is approximately 10% of the world's population. The European inhabits only a small part of the globe. The parts of the globe that the European occupies are relatively resourceless when compared to how occupied the non-European people. Compared to those occupied by the non-European people. And yet the European is saddled with great wealth, economic and political power. He controls the globe and maintains the world in a state of terror and has the earth now on the brink of suicide. We must question how it is that a minority people, a very small percentage of mankind, a people who are essentially resourceless in terms of their natural resources, maintain the power they have. Why is it that the peoples whose lands contain the wealth of the earth are the poorest people? Why is it that Africa, with some 20 to 30 strategic metals that make the space age possible, why is it that the image of Africa is projected at us time and time again as that of starving children, as societies in disorder, as societies on the verge of disaster? This implies to my mind that there must exist a political, social situation wherein the mental orientation of our people must be so structured that the power and the ability of the Europeans to rule this earth are continuously maintained. To a good extent, people are kept out of their minds by means of contradictions and conflicts, where the mind is faced with what appears to be unresolvable problems and dilemmas and seeks often to escape those contradictions, either through the creation of illness, misbehavior, or often through grabbing onto one of the horns of the dilemma, extreme conformity, or through extreme rebellion, all of which are designed ultimately to maintain the status quo. For the European to rule the world as he does today, or at least to intimidate it as he does, contradictions must be a chronic part of the lives of non-European people, as well as that of the European. The imperialistic European must essentially function in a very devilish fashion. That is, in a fashion that uses deception as its major characteristic. Consequently, fundamental values and ways of seeing reality must be reversed. The good must appear to be bad, the light dark. The truth must be taken for the lie for the truth. Otherwise, a small group such as European people could not continue to keep the rest of the world out of its mind. But hey, the contradictions, the maintaining the status quo, but also, like I said, the mindset keeping us out of our mind. We behave the way we behave by design. Sexy red exists by design. All the foolishness we see, the reality shows, the idea that it is now black, that hood, ratchet hood ghetto is authentic blackness. That is by design. We have been constructed into what we are today. The chains on our minds are tighter than they've ever been. Think about what was read earlier. We're not in concentration camps. We are the prisoners. We are the captives of the Europeans. And they took the physical chains off of us. And we're even better slaves now. How do you take physical chains off a group of people and then they become better slaves? That's because the chains on our minds were never taken off. Our mentalities have never been fixed. The trauma has never been resolved. They're gonna keep us at a messed up state. Keep the boot on the neck. I'm gonna keep feeding you slop. And when I say I'm gonna keep feeding you slop, I mean holistically, I'm gonna feed you slop. Your food is gonna be slop. Your education is gonna be slop. Your spirituality is gonna be slop. Your family dynamics is gonna be slop. Your community dynamics won't exist because I am your community. You're totally dependent upon me and I am your oppressor. And you're okay with it. That's the mentality. That's what's going on with us right now. And then, like he says, so people see, we like I stated earlier, we see defeating white supremacy as an insurmountable task, which is horrible. Looking at white supremacy as an insurmountable task. So the mindset of we will never be able to overthrow the system of white supremacy. So since we will never be able to overthrow the system of white supremacy, we're either going to conform to it or try to rebel against it. But like he says, either way, either stance you take, without changing the mindset, without actually building a real base, a real foundation for ourselves, no matter what we're doing, we're still adding to the status quo. Even the gentleman in the video is very critical of Farrakhan and Barack Obama and all the other people, Jesse Jackson, but he falls in line. We all fall in line. We're all contributing to the status quo because we haven't done the real work to put ourselves in a powerful position as a group of people to actually challenge the status quo. As an individual, we may be doing things, but until we build something as a collective, we're still adding to the status quo. The European hegemonic establishment must project false and injurious ideologies that are accepted by its victims. It must project self-serving ideologies that are seen as givens, as natural. It must project prudential ideologies that are seen as not subject to question. When the victims of European imperialistic domination accept its ideologies uncritically, they accept the rulership and dominance of the imperialistic European. Then they begin to identify with the very group that is responsible for their problems, right? So, like you said, the European hegemonic establishment must project false and injurious ideologies that are accepted by the victims. So we accept the idea that we are on bottom. We accept the idea that we're poor. We accept the idea that Africa and Africans don't have what they have. They don't have what they need. They are dependent people. They are poor people. They are people who are on the brink of starvation. We accept the ideologies that we're supposed to live in the ghettos. We accept the ideologies that we're supposed to be on bottom. We accept the ideologies that that blackness is synonymous with non-achievement, that blackness is not synonymous with failure. We accept those ideologies, which is detrimental. There is no future for Black people if we continue to move forward in the manner in which we're moving. There is no Black America as we speak. In October of 2024, on Monday, October 14th, 2024, there is no Black America. There are Black people in America. You can't have a nation of people who have broken mentalities when the individual and the collective esteem is non-existent, vacant esteem. We're not a community. We're not a nation. We're people within a nation that's trying to survive. One of the ideologies projected to maintain European dominance is the ideology of individualism, which we have brought in all the way, right? We hear a great deal today of the do your own thing and I do mine kind of situation, the so-called individualism of success and failure. That is where individual failure is seen as the result of what we call personal ineptness or misbehavior as a sign of moral inferiority. Now listen to what he's saying. Let me read that again. One of the ideologies projected to maintain European dominance is the ideology of individualism. We hear a great deal today of the do your own thing and I do mine kind of situation, the so-called individualism of success and failure. That is where individual failure is seen as a result of what we call personal ineptness and or misbehavior as a sign of moral inferiority. So we often look at our failures as solely our fault, and that's the ideologies and the rhetoric that is given to us, right? Your success is dependent solely upon you, which is not true. I am a living testament, and anybody who's successful is a living testament. That's why we have the quote, your net work determines your net worth, because the environment that you exist in matters. The environment you exist in matters, and the environment you exist in can either contribute to your failure or contribute to your decline. To your success. He goes on to say, that is, those peoples and individuals who fail in society fail as a result of problems within themselves, some individual shortcomings or ineptness, ultimately failing as a result of some moral problem within their personalities. William Graham Sumner, a pioneering and influential American sociologist, indicated that the poor and shiftless and imprudent, they are negligent, impractical, and inefficient, that they are the idle and intemperate, the extravagant and the vicious. Even those people who funded social work and the so-called helping professions and who saw themselves as liberals often saw the behavior and the failure of the victims of Eurocentric domination as the result of their personal misbehavior or the result of their moral weakness. We call this kind of approach the individual moral sensibility, which is used to justify the culture of inequality. That is, this individualism, this individual moral sensibility tries to persuade us that this society is equal and that this society makes available to all individuals equal the opportunities to advance in it. And if they fail, it is a result of their own personal problems. Of course, it becomes obvious that this kind of approach is a rationale and a rationalization by means of which the society itself ignores its own input as far as the failure of a person or people, such as our people are concerned. It helps us to ignore the impact of the social structure upon individual achievement and mobility. It tends almost literally to try to eradicate the idea that the individual succeeds or fails within a social structure. Environment matters. Individual decisions do matter, but the environment matters. There are scores and scores and scores of talented Black people who fell between the cracks because the environment didn't offer them what they needed to foster the abilities and the talents and the mindsets that they had. There's so many talented Black people who just didn't make it. The environment. We did not build an environment for ourselves to foster those type of people. And the Eurocentric system, if it chooses to foster those people, it will foster those people to help the maintenance of white supremacy. But we also know that white supremacy cherry picks the talent from Black America that it needs. It cherry picks the ones who are more malleable and use them to help further themselves and maintain the system of white supremacy, and the rest are discarded. If you are not malleable, or if you're not able to assimilate into the white system or the white culture, you will not get that chance. Since the individual does not succeed or fail in a vacuum, but succeeds or fails within a social system, the social system must be taken into consideration when we evaluate individual success and failure. This implies the possibility of the social structure itself may be principally responsible for the success of some and the failure of others. However, a society developed by the imperialistic European who aggregates to himself the dominance and rule over the vast majority of people cannot afford to truthfully and honestly look at the possibility that it is the structure of the Eurocentric society itself which greatly influences the individual and group fates of our people. While many of our liberal friends may not see the so-called success or failure or the condition of our people as a result of a moral problem, and they would possibly argue that the poor are no morally decrepit than the middle class or the upper class, they still tend to maintain the social status quo in a modified form by projecting a kind of scientistic ideology, one that appears at first to be neutral in its orientation. This ideology speaks of such apparently neutral things, such as the psychodynamic makeup of the individual. It speaks of weak egos, lack of personal integration, conflicts between id, ego, and superego, the dark side of the personality overtaking the light side of the personality. All kinds of systems, names, and intrapsychic mechanisms are invoked to explain the subjugation of some people and the domination of others, the so-called success of some and the failure of others. But like he's saying, look at the social structures, look at the social dynamics, look at the social makeups. Now, if you have a group of people within a society where resources, time, education, care, all that is being poured into that one group of people, and the other group of people is just living off the scraps, that other group of people will have a harder time producing more of the type of people who would further them. We just don't have what we need to produce an abundance of what we would just use the term the talented 10th, or the ones who could further the race or further the community. People need resources. People need care. People need nurturing. People need land, people need power, people need money, people need all those things. But when you talk about European dominance, when you talk about white supremacy, the purpose and the existence of white supremacy is to suppress other people, is to keep people dependent, keep people subservient, take away the abundance of resources. The world has always been like that. And now we're existing within a time where white supremacy is the dominant, is the dominant force on the universe, on the planet. It's the most dominant force on the planet, white supremacy, until it is defeated. And if the African people throughout the diaspora are the greatest foes of white supremacy, then they will do any and everything to keep us down, to keep us at a subservient level, to keep us oppressed, suppressed, depressed, and repressed. We should not have nothing. The foot will remain on the neck until we get the foot off of our neck. American social scientists, especially psychologists and sociologists, and the so-called helping professions come up to aid the European domination with what we call deficiency explanations. Deficiency explanations. We know that in the study of the Black child and the study of Black people within our universities, we get a bevy of deficiency terminologies or jargon, and we keep long semesters. And we get long semesters of courses about the deviant behavior of Black people. We get courses that use the white middle class child or the white middle class itself as a measure for all other peoples, and those individuals and people who do not measure up to the standards are seen as deviant or deficient in one form or another. And this is something we have to stop, and we have to stop immediately. Stop making whiteness the standard. I forgot what I was looking at yesterday. I was looking at something yesterday, and there was a bit after I got through, reading through the chapter and marking off what I want to talk about in this video. And I was looking at a video on YouTube or something, and we're talking about, whiteness being the standard, white people, white women or something, somewhere in the white realm, whiteness being the standard. And if we really look at it, 100%, we measure ourselves to whiteness. We are inadequate because we measure ourselves to whiteness. The ideology is we're inadequate. We want to be on the same level as the white people. Of course, that's the conditioning, because whiteness has always been the standard in America. There have been no other role models for Black people outside of the European until we became acquainted with knowledge of other people. But whiteness is still the standard. We're still looking at those other people through the lens of European people, through the lens of whiteness, through the lens of the assimilated Black person. So whiteness has always been the standard for us. And we continue to make whiteness the standard. We celebrate every time a Black person is the first in this and the first in that. Why are they still Black first? They're still Black first because the system of white supremacy has to be maintained. The system of white supremacy says we will keep you all down as long as possible. Whiteness can no longer be the standard for Black people. We have to create new standards for ourselves. Until we stop looking at white people, we will continue to look at ourselves as inferior and deficient. The most insane people on earth today are used as models for sanity. The sanity of the racist European itself is not questioned. The insanity of the European normally is not questioned. The possibility that we call normal is itself insane and not questioned. That the organization of the society, the nature of its human revelations, the structure of the economic system, the values that motivate it are the result of the madness of a people. Have we ever taken time to step back and step out of our normal minds for a minute and look at the madness that exists around us? Have we ever stopped for a moment and noted the madness that motivates us to jam us into the subways every morning, that motivates us to work endlessly and compulsively, that motivates us to feel guilty in a moment of leisure, that motivates us to consume endlessly, that motivates us to be the victims of all kinds of erratic fashions? Have we seen the craziness that peers out of us from our television screens? Have we recognized that the television screens projects little reality at all? that we measure ourselves against what we look at there, that TV advertising is designed to keep us in a state of frustration and dissatisfaction, and designed to inculcate us into a sense of inferiority, and designed to keep us from facing reality and confronting the truth, to divert us from the pitifulness or the situation, to not let us recognize as a people that we are in a precarious situation and that our very biological survival is in question. We sit in front of the TV set and look at those little families whose members are so polite to each other, who are so witty, who wait for each other to get through speaking before speaking themselves, who lay in just right in line at the right time, who resolve their problems so neatly and beautifully, and assume that they represent the typical family. What would happen if we really saw it like it? If we really saw it like it is on TV? You know, families where people really go upside each other's head, cuts each other off. In reality, if reality was projected there rather than pretense, the fantasies and the fairy tales that are placed there so that we as Black people imagine that we see the white families on television really exist, and are left with the inferiority complex, asking, why can't our families get along like that, be sweet to each other like that, be concerned with each other like that? We must look at the psychopathology of everyday life and must recognize we cannot have it both ways. We cannot talk about people who have enslaved us and who discriminate against us, who insult us, who do all manner of things against us, and then use them as models of normality. We cannot use these people who are criminals, who have the world on the edge of suicide, who are now getting ready to negotiate about how many bombs they're going to keep for their destroying the earth, how they're going to distribute death to the rest of the world, as models of normality. Well, we will have terroristic behavioral expressions as well. We would be insane. We would be insane to have the terrorists as our role models. That would explain a lot of our behavior patterns. These people, the Khrushchevs, the Chemenkovs, the Brezhnevs, the killers of many hundreds of thousands of people, study them. Study the hierarchy of the Russian Empire that rules over Poland and Yugoslavia and the nations of Eastern Europe. I don't give a hoot about whether they are Marxist or Leninist or anything else, but I know what they are as human beings. And we know the behavior that they have exhibited in the name of their political philosophies. We know that imperialist Europeans stole nations and destroyed hundreds of thousands of Amerindians, Africans, and other peoples whose every step in other people's nations has done little but destroy the local people, drive them out of their minds, destroy their cultures, and rob them of their wealth. And yet these people are held up as normal, are used as the standard against which we measure ourselves as a people, and are used as models for us to determine the way we wish our children to behave. Right? So that's insanity. That's blatant insanity. That's blatant insanity. We see our oppressors as the model of humanity. We want to be like them. That's the conditioning, though. That's the conditioning. And also the environmental tactics, going back to like the Racktopia experiment, right? Not only are we going to be that model, but we're going to be that model through a means of giving you everything you need, because, you know, we have everything we need and we have everything you need. And because we can give you everything you need, now you look at us through a lens of superiority. So Black people are looking at white people as white people are superior to us because white people can give us what we need to survive. So we must behave like them so we can do more than survive. We want to be on the level that they are because they're doing more than surviving. If we look at the history of the European imperialists, we see their psychology. As I have said on numerous occasions, the psychology of the rulers of this world, the psychology of Eurocentrically oriented people is not the psychology, it's not in the psychology books, but in the history books. And one merely needs then to read their history to get their psychology. And that history, of course, is not written by me, not written by Black scholars. It is not written by us prejudiced nationalists. It is written, of course, by the imperialists themselves, and therefore is a form of self-indictment, and it is there for all to see. It is an admission in of itself of the insane nature of the people who are in the control of the world today. We must then recognize that given this history and the desire on the part of the hegemonic European to maintain the status quo, the ideologies and other institutions created by them are created and maintained as a means of supporting the status quo itself. If we look at European imperialistic history and find that history embarrassing and harmful, then we are compelled to look at the ideologies that have flowed from the history. We cannot look and shake our heads in sadness at the enslavement of our people, the death and killing of the Amerindians, and the creation of the Holocaustic weapons, the wars that have been perpetrated by the imperialistic people, and the split that kind of information off from the ideologies put forth by those people. They are one and the same and are part and parcel of the same reality. And it is this attempt on the part and this attempt by the system to segment and cut off these things one from the other, to compartmentalize life and to compartmentalize reality, that to a great extent forms the basis for our mental, physical, and other kinds of problems that are existent in our community today. Right. History tells us everything we need to know about the European. Dr. John Henrik Clarke, I said time and time again, told us to study everything, study the history of the European. You will see the mentality and the history of the European. Look at Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dragula, son of Dragul, Vlad Dragula, Vlad the Impaler. Look how vile he was. Look at Queen Mary. Look at how vile she was. Go back and look at European history. Look how unclean and unkept they were. Look at how they were so quick to take each other out, to take each other's heads off. Look how they treated each other. Look how they enslaved each other. Look how they wiped each other out. Eugenics didn't start, the idea of eugenics didn't start with black people. Groups of white people committed genocide on each other. Look at what Greece did. Look at what Rome did. Look at what Alexander did, right? Look at European history. Look at the Gauls. Look at the Saxons. Look at what these people did. Look at the pirates. Look at the British. Look at the Americans, the USA. Look at the history of white people. Like Dr. Amos Wilson said earlier, everywhere the European has went, death has followed. Death, destruction, and desolence has followed the European everywhere they went on this globe. What does that tell you? This kind of ideology, of course, not only is an ideology that rationalizes the status quo and removes the responsibility from the social structures developed by Europeans, and removes the responsibility from that structure for bringing about the conditions inherent in the community and in individuals. It is also designed to drive us insane. So this ideology is not merely a means of rationalizing the status quo, but is also a projective means of creating an abnormal state of mind. Because when the individual is provoked to strive and then has his legs broken at the same time, and is told that it is his fault that the individual's self-respect is threatened, the individual's identity is destroyed, the individual's self-concept and self-esteem are washed out. Once the victim accepts the ideology of individualism, he is then set to blame himself in a very destructive sort of way, to begin to question his or her competence, to doubt his or her ability, to doubt his or her worth, and ultimately to hate himself. If I'm at a disadvantage, it's not my fault totally that I'm not winning. It's like the meme that we seen where the white man and the black man on the track. And the white man has a clear path in front of him on the track to win, and he has a head start. And the black man can't start the same time that the white man, and the black man has every obstacle imaginable in front of him. And the idea is if you don't get through all those obstacles, you are a failure. Because look at the white man. Look at how he's going through his obstacles, which are none. So it's rooting ourselves in reality, not being victims, but rooting ourselves in reality. We will never lay down and be victims. We have to figure it out. It is on us to figure out how to get around the obstacles. But if we come together and put all of our brilliant minds together, we can figure this thing out better than trying to figure it out as individuals. And that's been one of the biggest problems with us, is trying to figure out white supremacy from an individualistic standpoint. Even if we're part of a group or an organization, we're still not having a good enough number of people coming together to put the ideologies together to be a challenge to white supremacy. That hasn't happened in a while. Last time things like that would happen, well, that's how our political prisoners, and that's how a lot of the assassinations happen. But we have to be a threat to white supremacy. We have to be. But self-hatred is not only an individual reaction. It becomes part of the social system, because the individual who hates himself hates other people who reminds him of himself. And therefore, when he looks out at his sisters and brothers, he also looks at himself. And if he questions the adequacy and competence of himself, he questions the adequacy and competence of his sisters and brothers. So then the experience of failure and the experience of not achieving in a society not only becomes an individual experience, it becomes a social experience and a social disease. Therefore, the philosophy and the ideology of individualism is not an ideology that attacks the individual. It is an ideology that attacks the whole of a community. It is a part of a community ideology designed to maintain the dominance of one community over the other, to maintain the dominance of the Eurocentric community over the African community, right? And we play a major part in maintaining that dominance of the European community over the African community. We play a major role in that. And we have to be able to see how we contribute to our own demise. We've been saying this for a while. I've been saying this for a while. We, in large part, contribute to our own demise. We, in large part, contribute to the further deterioration of our minds, our families, our communities, our survival units, us as individuals, just whatever level we are at. We continue to contribute to the demise because we're always excusing bad behavior. There's always an excuse for the bad behavior because a lot of the bad behavior gets us closer to the whites. The Constitution of our nation guarantees what we call procedural liberties, while not guaranteeing what they may call the real nitty-gritty substantial liberties. What do we mean by that? It guarantees that certain procedures will be followed, that we can go to court, that we can be heard before a so-called jury of our peers and so forth, but it does not guarantee a freedom of hunger, a freedom from hunger. It does not guarantee housing, health care, and true education. Does it guarantee full employment? Does it guarantee safe working conditions? Does it guarantee a non-polluted earth? Does it guarantee true equality and equal distribution of resources? The Constitution does not guarantee those things. It guarantees us certain procedural rights and rules. It says then that we can go to court the same way the rich people go to court, that we can be heard in the court of law, that we must be read our Miranda rights upon arrest. But there's a difference between procedural and what actually happens. And he talked about this earlier in the book. Certainly, we may be read our rights, and certainly we may go to court, but without the money to pay for a good lawyer, belonging to the wrong ethnic group, belonging to the wrong class, while we may go through procedure, does not guarantee justice. Consequently, the justice and legal establishments become the very source of injustice and illegality. We are therein forced with a contradiction wherein the very law and order that is written into the Constitution becomes a double standard. I remember reading a phrase once that said, "The freedom of the press belongs to those who own the press." We can thus reiterate that the Constitution and the legal system in a society are not a neutral instrument, and that the law belongs to those who write it and those who use it to control the resources of a society. Hey, hey, laws must be enforced. If the laws are not enforced properly, you will have disorder and disarray. You will have racism. You will have hierarchy. You'll have the class issues. You will have the race issues. You will have the dominance issues. Because we wrote the laws and we have the ability to enforce or not enforce the laws. Matter of fact, we wrote the laws and we can enforce the laws our way because we have the manpower and the resources to support the law enforcement. So it is us who will control the laws. So we have to understand that we're working at a disadvantage when it comes to the laws. So a law that may be on the books in a non-discriminatory manner can be executed in a very discriminatory fashion. Therefore, we recognize that the Black individual who exhibits the same so-called behavior as the white individual is far more likely to be arrested, convicted, and jailed for that behavior. So a cop makes a determination based on the individual's race, upon the individual's sexuality, upon the individual's political and class characteristics as to whether arrest, conviction, and so forth will take place. So we recognize that the law, even though it is written in neutral terms, may be used for the purposes of intimidation, harassment, and means of immobilizing individuals. The very charges against arrested individuals may depend upon the racial nature, the class, and the politics of the individual's background. There are the kinds of contradictions that have destroyed the personalities of our people, that have destroyed our self-confidence, and have destroyed our self-concept as a people. And that's, like I said, I stopped reading on page 80, and that is from page 65 to 80. So understanding how even the enforcement of the laws goes into Black people remaining on the bottom. We can think back to the Watts riots and what happened to Rodney King and other instances like that. Even a lot of the instances that happened under Barack Obama's presidency, the executions of the number of Black men and Black women, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, all those people, Freddie Gray, all those people who were executed by law enforcement, by so-called law enforcement, you know, enforcing their laws and also forcing criminality on Black people. They have the ability to create criminals out of us. A situation happens where officers don't do the right thing, and a separate narrative is spent to make the officers look like they were in the right and make the Black person look like they were in the wrong. Now, they have body cams and things like that now, but narratives and falsehoods can still be spent and still be made, especially if things go to a jury trial. Black people are still being falsely convicted. There are statistics out there, like the white boy Charlie Kirk and all the other white people out there like to talk about these statistics, the criminal statistics of Black people. And I've looked at those statistics because right now we're looking at gun violence statistics in our city right now, because I'm a part of a cohort who's working to curb gun violence in our community. And all of the stats are looking at Black people as the main, the primary perpetrators and victims of gun violence in our community. But we're also looking at the conviction rates and the ideologies that goes behind the narratives or this character being created. Yes, we do play into it, but when we behave like criminals, we put ourselves at a greater disadvantage to be a victim of the system of white supremacy, a victim of the racist justice system, on top of us just being Black and being falsely accused. When we engage in criminal behavior because of the insanity that we are in, when we engage in criminal behavior, we make it worse for ourselves. So the idea is to insulate ourselves and protect ourselves as best as possible. We understand that the system of white supremacy will do any and everything to criminalize us and keep us at a subservient state, and keep us as slaves. Because yes, It is true. Black people, African people have made the greatest slaves, unfortunately. But we can reverse that by changing our minds and changing our program. We can be better, we can be greater human beings than we are slaves. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share this video. Thank you to everybody who support me on Patreon. Thank you for all the love pouring out to the Black History School that I got going on here in Tallahassee. So thank you for that. Thank you for supporting these videos. Please continue to like these videos, watch these videos, share this content. Let's make sure as many people get this information. Dr. Amos Wilson is a legend, and we want to make sure not just Dr. Amos Wilson, but all of our scholars, their information live on, because we're using the information properly to better ourselves. I love you all. Make sure y'all catch the next video coming up.